Hey folks, Gene Hammons here, founder and director of Profit from ERP. We're a consulting firm that helps companies evaluate, select, and implement ERP software. We help them not only pick out the right ERP and manage those complex implementation projects, but ultimately what we're after is we want them to see a great deal of return in terms of staff efficiencies, data validity, and increased revenue opportunities. Profit from ERP, that's what it's all about. So, what about the companies that don't engage with our services to help with the project? Well, what about the companies that don't get profit from ERP? Is that what you're asking me? You know, in an industry with an 80% failure rate, it's not good. A recent Pricewaterhouse study showed only 2.5% of companies complete all their projects that they undertake. So most people don't even finish these things. Odds are not in your favor going it alone. Most companies that don't engage our services, from our perspective, it seems like they just kind of like fade away into the foggy nighttime, never to be heard from again. But every once in a while, we hear things about former clients who decided to go in a different direction, the direction of no profit from ERP. Today, we're going to look at three of these companies. As you can imagine, intense failure, that's not something companies talk about in press releases. So we've kind of changed the names to protect the ignorant, but here's what we got. We've got a company that decided to go with big name consulting. And after the professional big name sales team left, they got a no-name consultant a year out of B school to run their project. And she ran it right into the ground. Another company ignored our findings completely because of a brother-in-law's advice, and they trusted their CPA firm's first ever implementation of a new product. Now that controller is calling his brother-in-law to see if he knows of any job openings. Yeah, that's bad. And then there's a client who went dark. They just disappeared until they hired a new CFO who turned out to be my MBA technology lab partner. We went through the same MBA program for about 2.5 years in a row. We kind of knew of each other. And they brought him in to straighten out several years of disaster upon disaster. Instead of profit from ERP, they chose to spend $500,000 on a $200,000 ERP project. Talk about cost overruns. All three of these companies made super basic mistakes along the way, mistakes we've seen and heard about so many times. That's why we initially developed the Profit from ERP methodology expressly to avoid these pitfalls. And we're going to fill you in on them so that you don't make the same mistakes. It's all about profit from ERP on this week's episode of the ER Podcast. So I've been in the company turnaround since like the early 80s and in the ERP business since 1998. And I've watched customer after customer do the same things the same way, treating ERP as if it were a capital expenditure rather than a business transformation. Making a purchasing decision instead of a concept to transform workflow for the company to get to the next level and beyond. Around 2012, after a prospect sent us this 200-question RFP, same 200-question RFP we'd seen downloaded from the internet a few hundred times, I said, there has just got to be a better way. So we created Profit from ERP, a way to cut costs upfront for our customers, our clients, and drive revenues in the long term by taking a different approach to how we evaluate, select, and implement ERP software. We studied hundreds of ERP projects that we'd been involved with over the years to that point, and we set aside all the high-performing ERP adopters, and from that, we extracted the tried and true methodologies, the things those successful companies did, things that we've now been able to replicate dozens of times for our clients since. And that became the methodology of Profit from ERP. Okay, chapter is called Trust here. Still, you know, as much experience as we have at this, we're not your brother-in-law, so why should you listen to us? Which is how our first disaster story started. It got even worse. When the client trusted a CPA firm's technology team, they were a small, kind of inexperienced technology staff, and they had a first-time ERP program implementation. But it had an established name, so what could go wrong? The answer is everything. We were working with this, it was franchise bakery outfit, think of them that way, a franchisor that operated kiosks in mall stores for several snack confectionaries. They had stores in multiple countries, several states. They had to connect to the franchise headquarters to upload reports every day. They had to interface with their POS, which that stands for point of sale, POS. That's their cash registers and credit. And they've got to link up to the credit card companies because that's where they've got a lot of deposits and cash going in. But other than that, pretty simple. We put together the cost revenue model, which is what we call our look at the financial impact of these systems. And it showed a short payback and a fairly comfortable ROI, that's return on investment. Plus, they'd have better data, reporting segmentation, so they could, track the airport stores versus the mall stores, run time of day analysis, how to staff, when our rushes are, all kinds of great data that we're going to be able to have. As we completed the preliminary research and we were moving on to the selection and demo stage, they kind of pulled out. They said, hey, thanks for all your great work you've done so far, but we'll take it from here, which is fine. I mean, and we'll do whatever they want to do. I mean, we generally recoup our consulting fees with substantial discounts that we're able to get in the software purchasing phase, and we hadn't gotten there yet with these guys. But whatever, that's their choice. And by this time, we'd kind of built somewhat of a relationship with the controller who was going to run this project. And so we told him, look, if there's anything we can help you with, just give us a call. And he would call back several times, right? First call, right? He tells us the CPA firm they used to audit their financials had a Microsoft Dynamics practice, and they had looked at a demo of Business Central, and they were going with that. Great. And they were not going to look at anything else, just one demo. They trusted their CPA firm based on their audit competency. Now, a couple things immediately stuck out, right? Microsoft markets 4 or 5 different ERP products that they acquired in the early 2000s under the Dynamics name. Profit from ERP, we've got clients using these various products from the get-go all over the place. Good stuff in the right situation. But historically, one of the big weaknesses in Microsoft ERP, in the ERP space that is the variability of the ERP expertise in the reseller channel, right? There's hundreds of great IT groups that, look at ERP as an add-on. Hey, here's one more product we can take to our customers. But ERP is not just another commodity. And IT guys are infrastructure guys. I mean, Microsoft doesn't make it very hard to become a reseller. And the existing guys that do Teams, Outlook, and Exchange, that's pretty different than looking at new strategic workflows to change everything in your company with ERP. And now this is not to say there's not some top-level Microsoft ERP resellers. We know of several trusted groups. We've done great work they've done stellar work with our clients in different industries. It's not that there's not top talent. It's just that there are thousands of lesser experienced folks out there, and you have to know the difference. Secondly, there's a potential experience match, okay? When you're dealing with ERP partners, consultants, and stuff, you're assuming you're dealing with people who've rolled out ERP in many situations across many industries. They've seen the hurdles and the missteps. So you assume, but in this business, you cannot assume. So the first thing you ask is, how many of these implementations have you done? Which, of course, we told our controller friend all this, and according to form, he ignored us. Microsoft Dynamics, we told you they've got 4 different ERP products. Originally, they were called Navision, Exapta, Great Plains, Solomon. Those became Dynamics NAV for Navision, GP, AX, etc. Around 2015, NetSuite really started making moves in the ERP market, winning a lot of selection evaluations. So Microsoft decided to create a cloud version of their ERPs to compete. Now, the AX or Exapta conversion went pretty well because it was one of the newer technologies, right? And it was easier to port something over to the cloud. The NAV product, which has, goes back into the early 80s or whatever, the NAV project hit some snags. And it was a great ERP. You could do all kinds of things with it you couldn't do with other ERP systems. We'd recommended it since 2002. But cloud conversion was taking a little bit longer. And while Microsoft is a huge name in business software, ERP is a microfraction of Microsoft. They make more money selling Xbox gaming gear than ERP. The cloud version of Navision, called Dynamics Business Central, it was late getting to market. They released limited modules at first. This was about 2017, and they had more and more development planned for the next release. Now, here's a free software evaluation tip. Never buy anything based on the next release, okay? It may or may not be what you dreamed of, and your assumptions of what you wish it could have been. Wishes, dreams, expectations are not something you need to pay a lot for. I mean, look forward to them, but don't buy them unseen. 2017, people all over the country were having huge issues with Business Central. It was good if you only needed a couple of those base modules that had already been released. So there were some limited success stories in the trade mags, but for other companies, Business Central was a nightmare. Everybody was talking about it. It wasn't ready for prime time. There were failures all over. People were saying it's just not ready. And the controller told us that he trusted his CPA firm based on the Dynamics NAV programs they'd installed in the past. We told them same code base, but it's a complete Business Central is a completely new and different program. You're going to be among the first running Business Central. And we advised against moving forward with BC and suggested, at least look at some demos from some of the other ERPs we'd recommended. And then he told us his brother-in-law worked in IT somewhere. And his brother-in-law told him Microsoft is going to really stand behind Business Central. More like hide behind Business Central. Newsflash. Look, these software companies, all of them are in the business of selling software. That's it. There's some support, that you can get from and everything like that. But it's up to you to evaluate that it's going to work in your business, and it's up to you to make it work. And the only thing our controller did right, he negotiated a not to exceed implementation contract. That is, you license the software, you have an implementation project done by implementation consultants, and that's usually about half the price of everything. In this case, the implementation was going to cost $67,000. That was going to be the max. And they were billing it out at $190 per hour. And they promised, hey, no charges past the 67K mark, no matter how long it takes. Okay. 3 or 4 months later, we hear from him again, the controller, that is. Disaster had struck. The budget overruns were huge. They couldn't connect to the franchisor's main system. The POS integration needed to connect to another new POS system that they were going to have to buy, but that new POS system had not yet been released, but it would come out any day now, due to be released soon. They'd be the first one to deploy it first again. I mean, when it comes to ERP, first should sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. That is, if you're old enough to remember chalkboards, but I digress. The CPA's technology team was way over budget, and they were becoming less and less responsive. They told them Business Central is a completely different program. The CPA installer techs hadn't realized that at the beginning. They certainly didn't mention it in the sales cycle, but now they were over $122,000 in billable hours, which, remember, was capped at 67K. So they've been basically working for free, taking twice the time they'd projected to implement this program. They can't get the system live, so they're stuck on the project. Fingers are being pointed everywhere. And, it's really not the implementer's fault. They weren't the ones that needed to scope out the integrations and understand the connection points and data transfers. And the internal controller was too busy talking to his brother-in-law. He hadn't thought to think about these integrations. And that's kind of something we normally kind of really dig into, but we weren't there either. So anyway, today, 2026, Business Central is working great for several of our smaller clients. But this story, again, happened back in 2017. So the situation is every single one of these issues would have been avoided by following the basic Profit from ERP methodology. It's all spelled out. Plus things like, never try to implement software that's not finished. Don't be the first implementation of anything. Never, ever. We did hear from the controller a few weeks later after that, who's asking if we knew anyone who needed a good controller. Yeah, he lost his job over that one. And that's not funny or amusing. It's just never be the first one of anything, which takes us to our next story. Profit from ERP. We're kind of a boutique consulting firm, right? We work on ERP only. I mean, we do selection and implementation, plus a few things that lead to ERP success, like team building, internal staff augmentation, about a dozen other things. Everything related to ERP and leading to the actual profit and return you're going to get from that ERP. But sometimes we have to compete with big name consulting firms, which is fine. There's plenty of work for us in our niche, plenty of things for big name consultants to do. that we don't do. So that's fine. So the case with this client, this was a company that did a technology networking infrastructure for county and local governments, sharing data and such all across the country. Pretty big operation. They had a really old version of Epicor running. It's very static, lots of ongoing consulting time involved to keep it going. They had to hire like report writers at 150 an hour just to make any minor change to a report. Or heaven forbid you want to look at a new report. Very old school, but hey, that's what software was like in the 90s. So they're looking to upgrade to new cloud software. They had us in there and we were talking about the ERP selection and implementation, as well as the big name consulting firm. One of those groups that's changed and merged their many big names together several times. Today, they subcontract with us sometimes, so we'll keep their current big names out of the ER podcast for now. But anyway, client tells me, "Hey, Gene, we liked you a lot. We could tell you're just as smart as the big name consultants. You guys are pretty equal in almost every way. We'd rather go with you, but the CEO wants to go with a big name." At this point, I'm just happy somebody thinks I'm a smart guy, so I'm all happy. So I thank them for considering us and call us if there's anything we can do, anything we can help with in the future. 18 months later, controller's on the phone again. "Gene, we are double our original budget. It's been 18 months. We're no closer to going live on this project than the day we first started. They've got this new 9-month expedited project proposal on my desk. It's even more expensive. Before I sign it, is there anything you can do to help us out?" And yeah, I liked the guy because he told me I was smart. And so I jumped in with both feet. As it turns out, he told me, the initial sales team from Big Name Consultant was senior level experienced people with experience well equivalent to mine. But when it came time to start the actual project, they sent in a young lady that had just graduated from business school to run the project. Maybe she was a year or two out. I don't know. With Profit from ERP, I personally run all of our projects. I mean, we may do other people in for staff augmentation, but I want to bring 30 years of ERP experience to the project. Looking at the big consulting young lady, my first clue as to her expertise was that she didn't know how to spell Epicor on the Visio flowcharts. Epicor, I mean, they've been around since the beginning of ERP, and while they're not the major player they were like 5 mergers ago, they're still pretty well known if you've dealt with any ERP projects to speak of. And as to the Intact implementation project, that had gone downhill from the beginning. Big Name Consulting had a NetSuite practice, right? And they had pushed their own NetSuite option as the recommended. That's what they told the client to do. It's kind of weird, just having yourself the recommendation in a selection. But anyway, Big Name had brought in an Intact reseller so they could have one other option to compare in the demos. And Intact was kind of new on the scene at this point. This was before they were acquired by Sage, but it was a really solid accounting package. And they had a great approach. Instead of being a really comprehensive ERP, what they wanted to do was do great accounting and connect to everything else really well, and let the other software be best of breed and build out that entire ERP infrastructure. Due to the newness of Intact, the pricing was significantly lower than NetSuite at the time. My client had gone with the lesser priced option, Intact. Apparently, the client had spent a lot of their budget on Visio diagrams from Big Name Consulting, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, now we're in the rescue mode, and what is it going to take to get all this fixed? I started looking at the implementation project documentation, and wait a minute, I know the woman who's the lead implementation consultant, the lead Intact implementation consultant on this project. She'd been one of the leading Mass 90 consultants at a company I'd worked for back in 2004. Mass 90 was big in those days, but it really faded out by 2015. Anyway, I asked around and some people that we both knew and found out that she was getting out of Mass 90 and moving into Intact, and this was her first Intact implementation project. First, the reseller company she was representing had no other Intact consultants on staff. This was their first company implementation. We talked about first. It was a first-rate disaster. So we completely shut down the project, fired the Intact implementation team, big name consultants. They were long gone by this point. We brought in some of the top Intact people in the country. We even I knew this VP of sales with Intact from way back, and he negotiated some free months of Intact subscription to help defray the huge budget overruns the client had already experienced. And we were able to get him live like 90 days later. Now, look, I'm not slamming big name consulting or even the first Intact reseller team. What I am saying is that in the sales process, everything is bunnies and kittens, and sometimes you'll even get rainbows. If you don't know how to navigate those sales processes, I mean, you got to validate every single assumption. It's not good enough to really like these guys. You have to find out if other people who use them still really like these guys. And know exactly who's going to be on your implementation team before you buy the software, and talk to other clients of the consulting firms. You find out the other clients, a big name, are 500 million annual revenue companies, and you're way smaller than that. That's probably not a good fit, right? Even when I'm going into the same industry with the same software, like if I've been using the same software for bakeries before and everything worked out for those bakeries, I'm still going to create workflow schematics, and I'm going to question every assumption for the next bakery client. Have the software team show us exactly how they're going to handle this specific process, our specific process. I mean, that's how you learn things like croissants are completely different than madeleines, and macaroons are different than those pumpkin pies you see at Costco. Different processes, different things to do. You can't just plug and play there. You have to know before you get into that. You're going to be able to get out of it. Buying any name is a recipe for disaster in the ERP world. I mean, what works for 1,000 other customers might not work in your specific instance. With Profit from ERP, we make sure we're investing in results. That's what we're looking for, is the resulting functionality that makes money for our clients, regardless of what name it comes under, right? We make recommendations with known entities, people we've done business with for over 28 years, and we know they're not going to leave our clients hanging. Still, we want them to show us these specific results, how it's going to work at that specific client prior to signing anything. And a little secret here, that is a great deal of comfort for the software company, knowing there's not going to be surprises when they get in. I mean, they're out there trying to sell software. They want to close deals. Yes, yes, yes. But they don't want to get into a problem implementation. Everybody loses, right? So what we're talking about is buying results, the results the client intends from the beginning. That's all that matters. We need to deliver those results at the end of the product. End of the project, and that's the focus. Bottom line, we had those guys live on Intact in 90 days, and the cost concessions from Intact helped recover some of the overspend the client had. Now, today, after a global software provider, Sage, has bought Intact, I don't think any discounts are being handed out for failed projects, so don't try this as home, as they say. But anyway, things worked out pretty well there at the end. All right, let's talk about the next story. It's called Lack of Project Goals and Averse to Change. Step one of the Profit from ERP methodology is to create a financial model of the system improvements. We're going to model out what the software is going to do. We're going to model out how that's going to save the company money. We're going to put a dollar number on that. If ERP is going to cut labor by 43 man days per month, what is the daily cost of those salaries? How long will it take to achieve that productivity? What else of value can we do with the people that we're empowering? I mean, if they don't have to sit there all day and key in invoices, what else can they do? Can they go from data input to actual accounting analysis, which is what they've been trained and learned how to do? There's lots of variables, and there's a good deal of assumptions, but overall, in the average client, we're going to come up with 20 to 30 ways ERP is going to benefit their business. And the financial analysis of the value of that benefit is key. We want to know the payback cash flows, the ROI, the return on investment, all documented and defined, so that you know you're going to get profit from ERP. And we do this before we look at the first software demo or even decide who to invite to the table to demo. You may have heard me talk in some past demos about what happens when you skip a step. Well, here's what happened to a client that didn't get profit from ERP or the methodology we use. Okay. In this instance, the company is an advertising clearinghouse, right? It's a little tricky because with advertising, you have different shows, media outlets, different ad rates based on day parts. The primary customer is usually an ad agency, but that same ad agency is going to place ads for different clients, different advertisers, and those ad buyers have different campaigns, locations, divisions. It's a little complex. But NetSuite had a version designed for ad agencies. So we thought we had a fit, and not throw a fit, but we thought we had a good fitting piece of software for the advertising clearinghouse. They'd been running their company on QuickBooks and spreadsheets. And when you talk about spreadsheets, we're talking about hundreds of spreadsheets, file cabinets full of spreadsheets in every room, walls of file cabinets, spreadsheets everywhere. I'd worked with them early on before they started their ERP project. We demoed the NetSuite option. We also looked at Intact and even Acumatica. We put together some initial pricing, all very high level at this point. I was subbing out to another ERP reseller at the time, and it was their client, the ad clearinghouse was. And the whole project just kind of went dark. I mean, when it comes to their ERP project, the advertising kept going, but the ERP project, it kind of faded away. They just quit returning phone calls and it all went away. I never really knew what happened until about 5 years later. Then they hire a new CFO, right? The particular CFO they hired, well, I knew him. We were technology lab partners together. We went through the same MBA program for about 2.5 years this was like .com boom era, the Y2K scare days back in the early part of the internet. He went into financial services. I got into technology and the emerging ERP industry. Anyway, we start talking. He fills me in on what really happened. Once you get enough accounting out of the system, out of any system, and onto spreadsheets, you eventually reach a point where you can't reliably close the books because the books become too complex. Nothing ties back together. This is the non-accountant's version for simplicity's sake. Just understand they were out of control financially, right? So months after talking with us, long before the new CFO had even gotten there, they did what any panicking accounting department would do, and they went out and bought NetSuite on their own. Like I said, I'd put together some pricing for them initially. We'd gotten the pricing from NetSuite and estimated both the software license and the consulting service hours for the implementation. So all in, it was just over like $216,000, something like that. But I was long gone by this time, and the clearinghouse was handling their own negotiations. They'd gotten several so-called discounts. and then came the implementation overruns. And then they also had to hire expensive temp staff to keep up with the manual data entry processes during implementation, which turned into about $100,000 in extra labor costs the first year. And then everybody hated the new system once it got up and running. Instead of like the $216K we'd initially estimated, at this point, they'd spent just short of $400,000. And that's when my MBA partner stepped in as CFO. At first, he heard from the team that NetSuite was absolute junk and they wanted to rip the whole thing out. Everybody hated it. As he dug deeper, he found out that their implementation strategy was to go on YouTube and replicate QuickBooks with NetSuite. Actually rebuild the functionality of a QuickBooks system using a more complex and expensive technology. Did I mention that the QuickBooks system wasn't working for them in the first place? It needed all those spreadsheets. This is kind of common among change-resistant ERP customers, right? Some people call it paving the cow path. And for you non-agricultural listeners in the audience, cows walk in a meandering back and forth manner, going back to the barn or wherever it is cows are going. Nobody knows why. It's super inefficient. And you could go in and you could pour concrete over this winding path. It's not going to get you any more cows in the barn, and it's not going to get the cows there any quicker. I've heard another ERP team call it creating a digital dinosaur. Yeah, you can do it, but it's still a dinosaur of a system. But whatever you call it, they obviously didn't want to change the way their out-of-control system was running. My MBA partner, now CFO, realized they had to do a re-implementation. He started over with NetSuite, called in a real team of implementation consultants, put together a project plan, outlined goals and objectives very similar to step 2 of the Profit from ERP methodology. So things were looking up from there. Now, not surprisingly, success followed. After re-implementation, the CFO, he couldn't say enough good things about NetSuite, and it was amazing what they could do with the new system. Simplicity was the order of the day, and the rest of the team agreed. But at this point, adding up License cost, years of additional labor, implementation cost 2 times, overruns the first time, months of poor performance, now a second implementation and the billable consulting hours there. A $216,000 project coming in at just over $500,000. Okay, key phrase here. We'll watch how to implement it on YouTube. Whenever anybody says that, turn around and run. It's going to cost you a lot more in the long run, and you're not going to get good functionality out of it. But, in our case, they avoided the very beginning stages of our initial planning project. Here's why things went wrong. Number one, in the beginning, they didn't have any program goals other than to replicate what they already had, which wasn't working. If Profit from ERP had been on the site, step 2 of our pre-purchase methodology is to define that financial return on project goals, which would have uncovered this issue before they spent the first dollar of the $500,000 they'd eventually spend. Number 2, they were averse to change, thinking, oh, we're the only organization who has the complexity we have. And because, a lot of that complexity was created because QuickBooks had no capacity to handle it in the first place. Step 4 and 6 of the Profit from ERP process has us doing proof of concept demos with workflow schematics and matching that to the software features and functions, right? Remember, the actual purchase phrase doesn't come till around step 7. So we would have seen this resistance to change, identified it long before spending the first dime on software. And number 3, no ERP project management experience in-house. This is, again, our SOP, using an internal PM to replace $175 per hour outside consultants with a $65 to $85 an hour internal contractor. You save over $100 per hour and put somebody with some real ERP experience on the job in your internal team, and that provides staff augmentation so you're not working your existing team to the bone trying to get this new ERP live. And you don't have to hire all those expensive temp contractors to do manual data entry, which keeps the business going but adds no value whatsoever to the project. Bottom line, after a hard and overly expensive start, they ended up going from a NetSuite system they initially hated to one that turned everything around. Timely financial data, better control. The accounting department says the entire organization looks at them differently now. Management has better understanding over the business. Your decision point here is, are you going to try and implement this yourself with videos on YouTube? I understand. Yeah, this is a video on YouTube. But other than this, every one of these project mistakes is addressed by our methodology and knowing how to deploy it at a lower overall net project cost. I'm not talking about a lower cost than the resulting overruns when you screw things up. I'm talking about a lower cost than even the original project plan. There's more to these stories, but the main thing to realize, going it alone cost these guys over $500,000. Had they brought our team in, it would have been just under $200K. And that would have happened early on, saving lost years and avoiding cost overruns of $300,000. We would have uncovered these issues long before the first software dollar was committed. And once we dealt with these issues, and if they decided to move on, we would have then have further controlled implementation costs and overruns. Did you know the average ERP project ends up at 186% over budget? Our last NetSuite go live happened at 61% of budget, a nearly 40% savings over the reseller's estimate, and 120% savings over the industry average. These stories really illustrate the value of using Profit from ERP, which is good in one way, but in reality, these stories make me sick. The cost, the missed opportunity, the waste, bad for the client, bad for my consultancy. Everybody loses. Our top clients are emerging companies with CFOs from Fortune 1000 companies. They know that from working at those large Fortune 1000 companies, those $5 million SAP projects at their last company, they realize from the experience of spending $7 million moving to Oracle Fusion implementation, you need ERP experience internally on your project team. And these guys want it all. They want dedicated consultants, full-time on the project, focused on them alone. They might need us for 12 months, could go 18. They realize the scope of disaster potentially down the line, and they want to cover themselves. Inexperienced. CFOs from smaller to mid-sized companies, they're just learning their ERP lessons the hard way, and that's just wrong. Whether you bring us in with a fractional CTO from the beginning to run your entire project, or just a part-time advisor for the final few weeks of the selection process, or just do a little coordination of the internal team during implementation, we can help you avoid these pitfalls. Main question, can you afford one more consultant on this project? And everyone's heard of teams of consultants from big name consulting running up huge billable hours. Wrong. We're providing custom design consulting projects to give you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, exactly on your budget, okay? Here's the thing. We net save all of our clients money. I mean, here's just one way. When you negotiate with a software company, you represent one sale. Profit from ERP, we represent dozens of sales this year, client after client. You're going to get discounts. Everybody gets discounts. It's the way the business works. Normally, you'll end up with 20, 25% off, and that'll look great. We get 40 to 60% off. We have never had a client where our billable hours were more than the difference between your 25% discount that you get and the 46% discount we average. And I know the typical CFO says at this point, well, wait a minute, I'm a pretty stout negotiator myself, and I'm sure you are. The last stout negotiator client I let negotiate software license, he comes back in the office going, I got 7%. I didn't say anything. But we pay for ourselves up front, and then we save money on the implementation. Yeah, we bring in staff augmentation, and you need to understand why. In the software sales process, they tell you that if you do more of the work, there are fewer billable hours, and that's great. These billable hours are going for $250, $275 an hour. You say, we'll take on the load. We'll roll up our sleeves. We'll get in there. Says every client ever. And what they don't say is for every hour that's on that implementation estimate using proven professionals, you need 3 hours from your internal staff. That's right. That 300-hour implementation estimate for your new software means you're going to need 900 staff hours over the next 6 months. And these people have full-time jobs already. Now, one of the reasons you need so many hours is because your staff doesn't do ERP implementations very often. And anytime you do things the first time, you're slower than people who do it constantly for years. But ERP the project is very time consuming and it's a very complex process. Taking it on by yourself when you've never done, you're walking into it blind. Let us help you there. Anyway, lots of numbers, lots of complexity. I know that makes bad podcast, but let's just leave it at this. You want to spend $200K on your ERP project or have it explode up to $500K? Do you want to do it right the first time? Or it's 2 or 3 years later till you get it right okay? It's up to you. But unless you want to end up in the next episode of the ER podcast when we talk horror stories, perhaps we should talk. Focus on what's important to your company. Find out your details. Find out what's particular to your ERP project. And then we'll go through our proven methodology with you, showing you every step of the way how we save you money, what we're doing, and how it helps you avoid the $500,000 pitfalls. We'd recommend you go for the profit from ERP. We'd recommend you go that route. But again, it's your money, and sometimes it's your job and your cost overrun and your wasted years. For your sake, let's talk. Reach out at info@profitfromerp.com. Just remember, info and profit from ERP, and you got it. Reach out and we'll get back to you personally. Thanks for listening to the ER podcast. Hey, make sure and like our podcast and subscribe to catch every episode. And we'll talk to you next time. I'm the founder and director, Gene Hammons, wishing you a profitable day and profit from your ERP.
The ER Podcast.